Hello and welcome to this webinar brought to you by the Lexing Network. We're very pleased for you to join us today. We're talking about cryptocurrency regulation around the world or in different jurisdictions. And I think today is a session I'm really looking forward to, especially because we have panelists from various different countries and gives us an opportunity to look at this topic from a global perspective. And I know that there were many questions that you asked in registering for today's session around how can we harmonize laws in different jurisdictions and how do we look at creating a global standard. So I think that that's a key thing we're going to be looking at, and hopefully we can help answer some of those questions. To start off with who you have on the call today, you've got myself, John Giles. I'm from Lexing South Africa, or Michelson's Lexing. And I'm going to be your host for today. I'm also going to be a panelist, so I'll give you the perspective from South Africa, but largely I'm going to be the host for today. And then to introduce you to our panelists, I'll start with Jennifer Beckage, who is from the East Coast of the US. Jennifer, thanks very much for joining us, and possibly would you like to briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. Jennifer Beckage. I'm the managing director of the Beckage firm. We're a boutique data security, privacy, AI, and crypto law firm in the United States. I myself started off in technology before I was a lawyer, so we're very tech focused and love innovation and working with organizations on compliance with all these new emerging laws.
Great, thanks very much, Jennifer. And then we've got Andres Elmer from Sweden, from Eris Law. Andres, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, John, and hi, everybody. So yes, I'm a legal consultant. I specialize in data protection and disputes and Eris, and I'm very happy to be here with everybody talking about the Swedish perspective on crypto asset regulation.
Great, and then we've got Winnie Chang from Singapore, and Winnie, so I'm moving across the world if you like. So Winnie, great, thanks very much for joining us. Good to have you with us.
Thanks for having me here. I'm Winnie Chang, Managing Director from Orion W, a boutique tech and fintech law firm in Singapore. And we provide legal support to fintech and crypto companies, covering everything from licensing, structuring commercial deals, to market access and compliance strategy. Back to you, John.
Thanks very much. And then finally, we've got Patrick Welsh from Hong Kong, from Tanner DeWitt. And Patrick, thanks very much for joining us.
Pleasure, John. So I lead the TMT practice at Tanner DeWitt, and within that we do a lot of fintech-related work, which includes business process method and business planning analysis in respect of crypto companies, and then leading that through regulatory analysis and other contractual requirements that they may have as they progress.
That's fantastic. All right, well, that's your panel for today. And essentially the agenda, we've got about 4 or 5 questions, which I'm going to be putting to the panel, and we'll be answering those questions. We have been through the questions you asked when you registered, and hopefully we'll answer that during the session. But please feel free to ask questions during today's session. The best place is to put it into the Q&A box. And Quinton, thanks very much. I see you've added a comment there. That's the best place to answer or ask questions, because other people can vote those questions up or down. And I've actually got a prize here today, which is 1 Bitcoin. And whoever asks the best question today wins the Bitcoin, this Bitcoin, not an actual Bitcoin. And you're welcome to collect it from our offices. So a bit of a token, if you like, but a token prize. But yeah, it's please ask questions. We'd like to engage with you. And the best place is to ask the questions through the Q&A box. You can also put comments in the chat, and the chat's the better place to put the comments, and the Q&A box is the better place for the questions and answers.
John, are the panelists eligible to win the Bitcoin?
Absolutely. You're welcome to ask questions as well of the fellow panelists, and it's open to everyone. I don't have competition rules, unfortunately, so it's a little bit, you know, yeah. But okay, great. And then we like to start off webinars by getting to know you a little bit better. And so I'm going to ask two polls quickly. The first is just to get an idea of the size of your organization. It generally just helps to understand whether we're talking about small, medium, or enterprises. So if you wouldn't mind answering that so we get an idea. All right, it looks like we've got the full spectrum, but about 40% of you are less than 50 employees, so quite a few small organizations. But also there are many in the 250 to 1,000 range. So actually it's a full spectrum. We've got people from all sizes. And then the other question that I like to ask is what role does your organization play in the cryptocurrency or crypto asset industry? And here we were limited by the number of choices. So those are some of the typical examples, but please feel free to type in the chat if your organization plays a different role. It's just a good idea and useful for us to get an idea of who's here. Great. So we've got a lot of banks and financial service providers, which is interesting. And then we've got a few people across the spectrum there. We've got quite a few cryptocurrency investors or traders. Yeah, so that's nice. We've got both institutions and possibly some individuals and some financial advisors as well, which is really good. Yeah, and then Eve doesn't have a role in the industry, but is interested, I assume, to find out more about how crypto assets are regulated. All right, fantastic. Thanks very much for that. Let's start with the first question. And the question really that I'm going to pose to each of the panelists is, how are cryptocurrencies regulated in your country? And I thought I should ask this question firstly to myself, so I can go first. And I'll talk a little bit about South Africa, but I'll be quite quick. It's difficult to do it in 2 minutes, but let me try. So the first is that the crypto assets are regulated by the Financial Sector Conduct Authority. And essentially it declared that crypto assets are financial products under the Financial Advisory and Intermediary Services Act, or FASE, as it's called in South Africa, which I think is quite clever. It's essentially bringing in existing legislation and expanding the ambit of it. And so we didn't need to create a whole new act. There was already an act that regulated exchanges, wallet providers, and brokers, and brought it under the ambit of FASE, which makes a lot of sense. Then the South African Reserve Bank plays a role. I think the key one here is from an exchange control perspective. And what's interesting in South Africa, there's a Pretoria High Court judgment this year, which effectively ruled that crypto is not subject to exchange control regulations, which is definitely not what the South African Reserve Bank wanted. And so they're going to appeal that decision and hopefully overturn that. But currently, cryptocurrencies are not subject to exchange control regulations in South Africa. Then the South African Revenue Service has also clarified the position and essentially treats crypto as an intangible asset for tax purposes. So this means that you are taxed on your profits. There could be capital gains tax could apply, and you need to declare crypto transactions on your tax return. Then the Financial Intelligence Center plays a role from an anti-money laundering and FICA perspective, or know your client. And essentially, a lot of organizations or crypto platforms and crypto players are now regarded as accountable institutions, and therefore they need to comply with AML laws and know your customer laws. And then lastly, the information regulator they regulate data protection and access to information in South Africa. And any organization, no matter where they are in the world, if you're processing personal information in South Africa, you have to register with that regulator and comply with their regulatory requirements. And that's another component of it. So very quickly, that's really an overview of South Africa. And maybe, Jennifer, if we can go to you next and talk a bit about the US. I know the Genius Act is high on the agenda. Yeah.
Thank you so much, John. So yes, the Genius Act is our landmark new law on cryptocurrency in the United States. It stands for Guiding and Establishing National Innovation for U.S. Stablecoin Act. We were just talking earlier before we started to present that its focus is really on stablecoin and not addressing Bitcoin or other potential currencies or assets. It really sets the standard as far as, what's required for this new regulatory framework that we have in the United States. So what an approved issuer needs to have from liquidity standpoint, from a capital standpoint. There's different standards that they need to have in place to address, risk management. The goal really is to, protect the end consumers. In the United States, we have a number of different federal agencies that are involved when it comes to cryptocurrency. The two that are really in charge of implementing and overseeing the Genius Act is the OCC and the FDIC. The OCC is the Office of the Comptroller of Currency. And so that group is going to oversee what, at the national level, federal level, United States, what's happening with stablecoin regulation. And under the Genius Act, you can have state-issued stablecoins as well, as long as they meet all of the requirements. But I'm going to focus on the state regulators briefly. Then we also have the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and that their focus is really to, work with the OCC, the United States Federal Reserve, to issue sort of guidance as far as how these assets are supposed to be kept safe, how they're supposed to be managed and regulated as well. So again, a lot of focus on risk management. In addition to that, we do have other federal agencies that can be involved when it comes to crypto. So that could be the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission in the United States, which really focuses on investor relations and investor protection. And they do have a task force that helps oversee crypto assets. They can issue no action letters, and provide a lot of guidance as far as, how this is going to roll out in the United States. Again, the Genius Act is new. We also have the CFTC, which is the Commodity Futures and Trading Commission. It regulates, things like digital assets that are classified as commodities. Bitcoin may be an example of that. And then we also have FinCEN, which is the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, really addressing a lot of anti-money laundering, really preventing crime in this area. That doesn't mean that there's not other federal regulators in the United States that could put their flag and stake in the ground saying that they are going to help with this. In the United States, there's a lot of state level, and then we have a federal law concerning unfair and deceptive business practices. So I can see that as a regulator being involved from that perspective as well.
Great, thanks very much, because there's a lot to unpack there, but that's a lovely overview. Thank you very much. Maybe we can go to Andres next. Andres is from Sweden, and hopefully can give us the EU picture. Yes, Andres, over to you.
Thank you, John. So in Sweden, the main legislation is based on European Union law. So this means that the main framework is the Markets in Asset and Crypto Assets Regulation, also known as the MiCA. MiCA came into force in December 2024, so it's quite recent. And to prepare for the MiCA Act, Sweden adopted a few laws to smooth things. And I would say that the main law would be that it named Finansinspektionen. Finansinspektionen is the Swedish supervising financial authority, and it set out to be the competent authority to regulate and provide oversight for anything related to crypto assets and crypto asset service providers. There's other piece of legislation that directly affects crypto assets and crypto asset service providers, such as marketing laws, consumer protection laws, and naturally AML and counter and CFT laws. And there's also this regulation that it's called the European Union's transfer of funds regulation, also known as the travel rule, which it requires that all transactions regarding crypto assets are registered from the recipient and the sender's side, and even if it's in a self-hosted wallet. So basically, yeah, it's brand new, and Finansinspektionen, as the supervising authority, is in charge to provide all the rules and all the guidelines for everything crypto asset related, from authorizations to how it develops in the market.
Great. Thanks very much, Andres. That's really interesting. And thanks for your questions. Please keep them coming. I think maybe just to answer Quinton, the difference between crypto assets and cryptocurrencies is that crypto assets is the broader category that encompasses any type of virtual asset or crypto asset, whereas cryptocurrency is one kind of crypto asset, and then stable coins being one kind of cryptocurrency. So that's roughly how it works. I think a lot of people do use crypto assets to keep it broad in terms of what the category is. But yeah, we're using a combination of those two terminologies today. All right, great. So I think let's go across to Singapore and to Winnie.
Thanks, John. So in Singapore, Singapore does not regulate crypto as a single concept. So instead, the regulatory framework here, especially the one that applies to a cryptocurrency, will very much depend on the function of the crypto token. So in other words, what the digital token actually does. So if a token behaves like digital money and can be used to pay for goods and services, it's treated as a digital payment token, or what we call it here, DPT. And such token is regulated under the Payment Services Act in Singapore. And if the token represents a security or investment contract, it's actually governed as a capital markets product under the Securities and Futures Act. So this pragmatic functional model in Singapore allows us to stay technology neutral while ensuring that the same risks are regulated more or less in the same way. The financial authority in Singapore, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, or MAS, so has been very progressively tightening standards for digital payment token service providers, from requiring licensing, strong AML controls, segregation of customer assets, to requiring clear risk disclosures to be given to consumers. So this means that if you're in the business of buying or selling digital payment tokens, or running a crypto exchange, transferring digital payment tokens, or providing custodial wallet services, you need to be licensed by the financial regulator, MAS, in Singapore. If You will also need to put in place robust compliance systems, especially around anti-money laundering controls over here. So in short, Singapore does support digital asset innovation, but always within a very robust regulatory framework that safeguards consumers and maintains financial and market integrity. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Winnie. Yeah, that's really interesting. And last but not least is for Patrick in Hong Kong.
Well, in Hong Kong, it's, I guess comparing it to Singapore, it's same, but different in that we have a similar approach in terms of looking at what the function of the digital asset or the digital token is, and then the regulation derives from that. One point of contrast is that we would have a couple of different regulators because Hong Kong financial regulation operates according to 3 different pillars in respect of financial services, insurance, securities, and banking and payments. So, for instance, if the digital asset is classified as a security, then that would trigger requirements under the Securities and Futures Ordinance, and the Securities and Futures Commission would be the competent regulator. If it was what's called in Hong Kong a virtual asset that has functions around payment and governance, particularly, then it would be classified as a virtual asset that would be regulated under a chapter within the Anti-Money Laundering and Counter Financing of Terrorists Ordinance, shortened to AMLO, Anti-Money Laundering Ordinance. And there, for that, the competent regulator is also the SFC, but they're deriving their statutory powers from a different piece of legislation. And then we also have a standalone piece of legislation that focuses on stable coins, which was introduced this year, actually came into effect. Here's a quiz question for you on the same day as the Genius Act in the US. So there was a little bit of internal competition going on in relation to there that ended up in an honorable draw. They're the competent regulators, the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, which is the regulator that deals with banking and also some aspects of payments, particularly around stored value facilities. So you see that there's different regulators, but also different activities. And those activities have, because in many ways the asset isn't regulated. What's regulated is the activity by reference to the nature of the function of the digital asset itself. So for instance, in securities, the typical activities that are regulated are dealing in securities, the securities in this instance being the crypto asset, advising on securities, and also automated trading services, which is the trading platforms, and fund management to the extent that the fund has an exposure to digital assets of more than 10%. Whereas in respect of virtual assets that are not securities, but are payment or governance tokens. Up till now, the only relevant activity was operating a trading platform. But there are consultations in place to introduce also regulation in respect of custodian activities as it relates to virtual assets, and also dealing in virtual assets, which would cover OTC transactions and brokerage activities and so forth. So you look at the nature of the asset, what its function is. You look at the nature of activity, and through that matrix, you get the system of regulation and the relevant licensing issues that you might want to piece together. So that's how Hong Kong system works in respect of the regulation of crypto assets.
Thanks very much, Patrick. Yeah, I mean, sure, that's a really interesting overview from multiple different countries. And I think one thing that strikes me is that there's a myth that cryptocurrencies aren't regulated. And I think what you've just heard over the last 15 minutes makes it very clear that there are lots of regulations that relate to crypto assets. And I think the other key insight or view about what's just been said is that it's pretty complicated. It's there's a lot to consider and a lot of different aspects to it. Often without there being one act that regulates it, it's more a combination of different regulators or authorities and different laws that come into play in different contexts. Does anyone on the panel have any views and thoughts about comparatively the different jurisdictions now that we've heard from all the different countries? No?
One of the
Okay.
things that occurred to me, John, is that although it's complicated, you could see pretty consistent themes across the different jurisdictions. If you look at MiCA, if you look at the regulation in Singapore, you look at the regulation in Hong Kong, and the somewhat different approach that's taken in the US also. There are common themes, because one of the things that regulators globally have been addressing is how do you get convergence between regulation in order to avoid regulatory arbitrage, which means that bad actors go to the point of weakest regulation, and it has a contagion effect to to what regulators globally are trying to achieve. So there is a degree of commonality. There may be different routes that different jurisdictions are using to get to there, but that's probably another theme that's worthwhile drawing out.
I
Yes.
agree with
Yeah.
that. And obviously, all of these laws are very consumer focused, right? So providing consumer protections. And I think that they're, usually, as we all know, technology usually doesn't keep up with, or the law doesn't keep up with technology. And here there's an effort to do that, to really allow for innovation amongst the countries at different varying levels of regulatory focus. But I think that's exciting. So it still feels like the wild, wild west, as we would say here in the United States. But I think that pro-innovation, approach is exciting.
And it's great
Yes.
to have international bodies like the Financial Action Task Force that's setting very important international standards on AML, rules that have been kind of implemented across the world. So we can expect kind of functional harmonization, perhaps, focusing on getting to similar outcomes rather than having exactly or identical rules everywhere.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that just to follow up, MiCA, the heart of MiCA is investor and consumer protection. But just to highlight one difference, I think one of the strengths of MiCA is that it really defines and lists all the crypto asset service providers, what are the services basically. And I think it lists the whole ecosystem of what CASPs mean. So we have in this list, exchanging crypto for fiat mainly. That's a main one. But we also have custody, safekeeping, operating and trading platforms, advising in crypto assets, placing crypto assets, and the technical side, the transmissions and the protocols involved in transferring different crypto assets. So even though the regulation for the whole European internal market is focused on protecting and safeguarding consumers and investors' assets and rights, at the same time it tries to harmonize the whole ecosystem of what is a service provided within crypto assets.
Great, thanks very much. That's really interesting. And thanks for your questions. I see there are some questions in the box. We will also tackle questions at the end of today's session. We've got 10 minutes at the end for questions, so we will tackle some then. I might try and bring some in as we carry on with the discussion. Yeah, so the next key question that I want to put to each of the panelists is, what challenges do organizations face regarding crypto in your particular country? And maybe let's mix the order up a little bit. Should we start with Padraig? Yeah, check in with you.
Sure. One of the things that when a prospective client comes to us, one of the things that is almost always the case in respect of what their business plan is that it's not a business plan that is solved by Hong Kong law alone. It's usually that it's a project that has IT being provided and supported from a particular location, a licensed entity somewhere else, some business activity in Hong Kong, and some users and participants in different parts of the world. It's rare that you have a project that crosses your desk that is single jurisdiction only. So it is very much a global type of business. And the legal issues that it throws up are very much multi-jurisdictional. And this is one of the major challenges. Because often when clients come to you, they're looking for, as if it could be found in one lawyer, a suite of answers for multi-jurisdictional issues. So that's one of the difficulties that clients face, where one of the nice things in terms of being able to propose a solution is to be able to say, do an analysis in respect of where the issues are arising, what systems of law apply to those issues, and match those to legal service providers and other participants in the ecosystem to be able to meet those challenges and do project coordination around that. It's one of the things, for instance, that the Lexing Network does particularly well, as you can even see from the panel gathered here today, is to be able to have expertise across different parts of the world in very specialist niche areas that are able to respond to that call to action.
Patrick, I think that was very well said. It's definitely challenges that I've experienced in the South African context. I think many organizations I speak to are looking at Africa as a whole and are wanting a solution for many African countries. So back to that multi-jurisdictional issue. And then also, often it requires skills that are quite multidisciplinary. If you think of tax, for example, and in South Africa, we are a relatively small firm, and tax is not our focus. And so it can be difficult to bring together professionals with the relevant skills in the different areas in order to provide solutions for clients. Great. So let's go to Winnie in Singapore.
Yes, another practical challenge that we often see is to do with crypto companies getting banking access. So traditional banks remain very cautious with virtual asset providers due to AML concerns, although that's changing. So we often recommend companies to start early, identify crypto-friendly banks, and build those relationships really early in your company expansion journey. So even before your licenses are fully granted. And the Payment Services Act in Singapore has a very broad scope. So one of the key challenges for companies sometimes is about understanding and operationalizing regulation effectively. So, for example, our law over here, the PS Act, is designed to capture a wide range of digital asset activities. So even if you do not directly hold crypto, you might still be performing some licensable activities, such as arranging transfers between wallets or servicing Singapore users from offshore platforms. So that's why it's really important to map your transaction flow end to end, setting out clearly who initiates the transaction, who routes the transaction, and who controls the keys, so that you can clearly identify your various kind of country touch points and structure your operations accordingly.
Great, thanks very much, Winnie. If we can go across to Andres.
Thanks, John. So, from the Swedish perspective, because MiCA is relatively new, organizations face a number of challenges just because they have to adapt to this new framework. To name a few of these challenges, just to start out with the process of requesting, applying for authorization for organizations. Normally, the documentation that has to accompany a authorization application is quite complex. So we tend to help organizations navigate with this level of complexity and just help them prepare for the documentation, for operations, for governance, and yeah, basically just to fulfill all the compliance requirements that it's expected from them. Another example of the challenges is the European Union Transfer of Funds regulation, the travel rule. Most companies need help establishing a framework, an internal framework or protocol that helps them verify, identify, and collect the information for transfers. Also, anti-money laundering expectations in Sweden is very rigorous. So we help companies prepare for reporting procedures, strict screening processes, and on the other side, crypto asset service providers, they also have to comply with consumer protection and special marketing and disclosure rules. So we help organizations sometimes prepare the white papers for the service that they plan to provide. And yeah, so and I would like to say that the main challenge that we've encountered is the first challenge that Winnie brought up, which is helping companies open a bank account, because it has been traditionally very difficult for any company in the crypto asset service provider ecosystem to just start opening a bank account. So we also help companies identify more crypto friendly institutions that can help them with their their different processes that they require. But yeah, just new regulation, new expectations, and of course, new difficulties.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. We fly across the Atlantic to America to Jennifer.
Sure. I mean, I echo what everybody else said. I think another issue that a lot of organizations face is really finding the right talent and in-house talent. So a lot of reliance on third parties and trusted advisors like us who are on this webinar today. As everyone mentioned, right, the regulatory landscape is new and emerging. On the state side, we've got federal laws and state laws, and it's a patchwork of laws, right? And then when you couple in all of these other jurisdictions, as mentioned before, it's usually not just a single jurisdiction we're looking at. Now the cost for compliance is really high, from legal costs and licensing and just every step that you have to take, which creates barriers to entry. And then also in the United States, we have a lot of very active regulators. So having those concerns about those enforcement actions, potential fines and penalties, making sure that the compliance paperwork is in place to avoid those, again, it just makes things very difficult. And of course, in the United States, we love our litigation. So here, in addition to just compliance, we always have to be fearful of, how this might be interpreted by the courts, what could litigation look like, and then, what does insurance look like for these sorts of activities as well.
Okay, great. And yeah, thanks very much. I think I'll go in reverse order again and pose the next question to the panel, which is very much related. But now that we've explored some of the challenges and some of you did mention how you assist organizations, but maybe if each of you would like to add something in terms of how you help organizations comply with these regulations. And maybe, Jennifer, is anything more you'd like to add as to how you help organizations?
Sure. I mean, a lot of it just is, addressing those compliance frameworks, understanding, what's at issue, training, governance, contracts, policies, just helping them in every sort of aspect of their journey. Something a little not off topic, but specialty, well, I don't want to say specialty, but focus, I guess, of our law firm. In the United States, you're not supposed to say that you have a specialty. So that's why I corrected myself. Is we have a crypto fraud division here. So we work with organizations and high net worth individuals who have lost, millions of dollars in crypto fraud transactions. We have in-house certified individuals on a tool that traces crypto fraud transactions. It's the same tool that the government uses. And we're very, very active in this space and have been so for a while. So we help with recovery of crypto fraud, whether it's from a pig butchering scam or some other kind of fraud or deception that's happened. So just, organizations may not be looking at this right now. A lot of the fraud that we're seeing is more directed towards high net worth individuals on the state side. But being part of the Lexing network is great because as we're able to trace those funds from country to country, from wallet to wallet, we're able to work with our partners in the Lexing network to have sort of those boots on the ground as well.
Right. So, and Andres, you mentioned quite a lot about how you help organizations, but anything you'd like to add?
Yeah. So, Eris Law is a tech-based law firm that mostly works with a lot of, we work with a lot of fintech clients and we do a lot of GRC. Besides helping out with the different documentation that it's required, I also, and I think this is key, because MiCA is so new, part of our work within the crypto part is a lot of training. And it's training and helping prepare some of the stakeholders and organizations about what is expected from them and how important it is for them to keep certain measures and procedures in place so they remain compliant. So we help a lot with a lot of the implementation of some of the policies also that we help them design. And of course, we help them we represent their interests in front of the supervising authority, Finansinspektion. So training and help the organizations within this space remain compliant according to their needs.
Yeah, great. So maybe just to pick up on something there is what we've experienced is organizations sometimes don't have people in South Africa or in other countries, and therefore they're looking for a regulatory representative in different countries. And that's also a role that the Lexing network can play, is to have a representative in different countries to then register with authorities and represent the organization with those different authorities or regulators. Winnie, if we can maybe go across to you.
Great, thanks, John. So we've helped clients and companies to classify their tokens correctly. So we've issued kind of legal opinions on this issue, because classification does drive everything else. For example, which act applies, what license is required, and how the regulator will view their proposed activities. We've also helped companies to map their business models against kind of the relevant regulatory frameworks, so they know exactly, what rules apply to them and where they stand. We also guide them through the compliance lifecycle as well. So not just how to get licensed, but how to stay compliant throughout the process. So this would include a number of work activities that I think Andreas mentioned earlier. For example, drafting AML policies and advising on kind of technology risk management, outsourcing controls, and governance requirements. And most importantly, we've helped companies to obtain licenses in order to allow them to operate out in Singapore and also scale the operations out here.
Thanks, Winnie. That's very interesting. Patrick?
Maybe just to give a different complexion to something that has already been spoken about the other participants in the panel. Because of the way that Hong Kong regulation works, there are some areas of activities that might be regulated elsewhere, under MiCA, for instance, that actually don't require a license in Hong Kong, or something in the nature of the virtual asset or crypto asset itself that doesn't admit itself to being subject to regulation, as in direct regulation that requires a license in Hong Kong. So sometimes we're approached by clients with a business model that is intended to fall within one of those, let's call it, so exactly correct to call it an unregulated space, but a space that does not require specific license, and that's designed for crypto asset activities elsewhere. And what we would do is do a pretty detailed, granular analysis of the business model to see if it is correct to say that a licensing requirement isn't involved. I mean, this typically happens in respect of crypto assets that have some function in respect of payments in particular. And that's been an area where we also see that lawyers have a role to play, because it's usually the case that the client will want some degree of comfort that they are operating lawfully in respect of their activities within your jurisdiction.
Thanks very much. Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I'm just mindful of the time. I'm sure it's flown by, and I do want to get to some questions at the end. But before we go to the questions, maybe if each of the panelists could mention any take-home points or key insights that you'd like to mention based on the discussion, and maybe Patrick, if we can start with you.
I guess probably the key point in terms of looking at Hong Kong as a jurisdiction is that Hong Kong has quite a long track record in respect of looking at crypto asset activity and making licenses available within that space, going back really to 2018. And to periods of time when the lead of RSFC was also the lead of IOSCO, which is the Global Organization for Securities Regulators. So Hong Kong's been active in terms of looking for a pragmatic and gradually opening approach to regulation and licensing in respect of crypto assets. That's there, or even in terms of a published policy framework called the Aspire framework, which is published by the Securities and Futures Commission. That's also supported by a government policy from the Financial Services and Treasury Bureau called the LEAP policy. So there's government initiatives, there is regulatory engagement, there's a consistently applied regulatory framework that is being supplemented as the market activity deepens and broadens. So it's a good place in respect of Web3 activity generally and crypto assets in particular. It is a place where the regulatory standards are high, but also there are tried and tested routes in respect of getting yourself to a comfortable place in respect of your business operations.
Thanks, Patrick. And across to Winnie.
Yeah, so Singapore's approach to crypto regulation really captures its strengths as a financial center. The approach is balanced, it's risk-based, and it's innovation-friendly. So the regulator here welcomes technology innovation in financial services, but it also wants to make sure that innovation happens within a framework of trust, stability, and consumer protection. So the key takeaway is this, license early, comply continuously throughout the journey, and communicate openly as well. So if you embed compliance into your business DNA as a whole, Singapore is one of the most supportive and credible places in the world to build a digital asset business.
Great, thanks. And to Andres.
Thank you, John. So just, two small ideas. For organizations, compliance in crypto space, it's just not only, authorizations or licenses. It's in Sweden, all the rules that apply to crypto asset providers and service providers in Sweden, you have to take into account that MiCA and the complementary Swedish laws that apply. it requires that organizations have a solid framework, not only on, very specific crypto technical things, but also take into consideration that investor protection, operation resilience on the technical side, and also anti-money laundering and and different consumer protection marketing directives that apply. And also, I would say that the regulation from the side of the regulator in Sweden, there's a very strong focus on consumer protection. So organizations here, they must adapt and understand that they will be under a very robust scrutiny by the supervising authority in order for them to feel safe that they're protecting investors and consumers.
Great, thanks. And Jennifer?
Hi, thanks. I think for organizations, and I'm sure there's a lot of different types of organizations on today's webinar, is, first identifying what's your goal. Are you looking for licensing, or are you an organization that wants to start offering retail payments that allow for some sort of, crypto checkout? Are you offering incentives, for your employees, for payroll options, right, with crypto? Whatever it might be, identifying that specific goal will really help drive what you're going to do, because there's just so many things to factor. You can get really lost, if you will, if you don't have that specific goal laid out. And then you focus on that legal and regulatory review. You look at your contracts. You look, as Winnie said, right, your compliance framework that you're going to continue to build upon. Insurance, the partner selection for vendors or third parties that are going to help you where you may not have that in-house capabilities. And to sort of lean on, I think it was Boris who asked a question in the Q&A, is how do we assess this risk? And is it a lot like cyber risk? I do a lot in incident response. It's what I'm best known for in the United States. I've been named one of the top 50 data breach lawyers in the country for the last 8 years in a row. And, from an insurance standpoint, from a business standpoint, nobody anticipated ransomware was going to be what it became, right? How do we assess this sort of unknown risk? And so I think that's the big question today. I don't think there's an answer that we can provide you, but there are things that we can lean on based on, other domains like cyber risk to learn some lessons. And I think the biggest one is that technology continues to change. So despite regulatory frameworks and compliance, there's still going to be technology challenges. And sorry, I'm already stealing some questions that you're going to ask here, John, in a minute, but someone asked, can crypto survive quantum? Today it can, tomorrow maybe not, right? So assessing that risk overall, I think, is going to continue to be a challenge. And it's not a one and done for organizations. But that's all.
Well, thanks very much. And thanks for answering a few questions. And if I could maybe ask the panelists to have a look at the questions that are in the Q&A and see if there are any you'd like to answer. And you're welcome to put your hand up to answer any of those. And just while you're reading that, a couple of closing remarks from my side. The one is that I wanted to share my screen with you and show you this resource here. I did post the link in the chat, but the Lexing Network, what we did is we created a global comparative study of different countries, and you can see we did about 18 countries. And you can access this and read in more detail the different laws in those different countries. It's part of our Lexing Insights series. And then the other thing to mention is that if you're interested in engaging any of us that are on the call or members of the Lexing Network, you can connect with them through the Lexing website, but you can also connect through me and I can channel you to the right people. And so you're welcome to email me at john@michelsons.com. I'll pop that in the chat and also add the address for the Lexing Network website where you can go and find out more information. All right, I think let's get to some questions and answers. I think a couple of them are possibly directed at me. The first one is Sibahle. the question about whether the FSCA has a chance of winning the appeal of the court case. I think that is a great question, which is a very difficult answer. I think we'd need senior counsel's opinion as to whether that appeal would succeed. I think you're referring to the Pretoria High Court case around exchange control. And then Quinton, yeah, great question about quantum computing. I think Jennifer answered that, and that's something we could debate and talk a lot about for a long time. Looking at some of the other ones, does any of the panelists wish to answer any other questions?
John, I might have a go at a question that was posed by Dylan Kirk, which was whether countries should focus on creating a universal law rather than jurisdiction-specific laws, given that cryptocurrency by its nature is borderless. I think that there are two approaches to this. One is that most sophisticated financial services centers are looking at converging their laws and regulations so that they are relatively consistent. You won't find any form of universal law, because attempts at that, for instance, are why Brexit occurred and is no longer part of the EU. Countries like to be countries in respect of certain things, so there will still be national laws. But the most you can aim for is convergence among those national laws to make sure that there are similar regulatory standards in places where people like to do business relating to crypto assets. But I think the other thing is that there's something, I would analyze it slightly differently in respect of cryptocurrency and borderless, and whether that means that you need one law for every place. In that the way that regulation looks, particularly financial services regulation, it looks at people and it looks at product. So cryptocurrency as a product might be borderless, but people aren't. People and companies and businesses are in a particular location. So where you've got feet on the ground and people are doing things, and that is a regulated activity in some way, then that is something that can be regulated, for which licenses should be applied for, to the extent that it relates to activities that fall within the legislation of that country. So the nature of the asset alone, or the product alone, is not the only lens to look at things.
And to dovetail kind of what Patrick said too, it's difficult to have kind of one size fits all regulatory regime across various jurisdictions, because different countries do differ in their risk appetites, political priorities, and financial market maturity as well. So what we could potentially kind of aim for, or as a more achievable kind of steps, would be having kind of mutual recognitions or some sort of regulatory equivalence in certain specific areas, such as licensing standards, travel rule compliance, AML standards, disclosure obligations.
Well, and let's look at the past, right? Data security laws, I just mentioned, I really focus on incident response. Every country in the US, every state has its own data breach law. Data privacy, right? Every country has its own data privacy law with its own nuances. So I think we're not really ever going to get fully away from that. There can be some alignment, but I, agree, Winnie, having standards is the best way to go, because I love the comments earlier. It's the people, the product may, be universal, right? But the people in their individual jurisdictions are going to have their own jurisdictions to deal with. You said it more poignant than I am, but it's 4 a.m. here in the United States. So I think, we're still going to have, these challenges going forward, and associating with great trusted advisors can help you navigate it. But we do have history that we can lean on how to approach these very complex legal frameworks.
I just want
Great.
that since MiCA is EU regulation and it applies directly to all EU member states, even though it is regulation, and there still is a very strong interest to heavily regulate crypto asset service providers throughout Europe. There's still different, I would say, since it's so new, there's still some different temperaments in the approach of regulating crypto and incentivizing crypto asset service providers. But at the end, with a careful review of what MiCA really means, it's also a way for organizations to mature in the ecosystem, build trust with all this regulation, and it allows for companies to scale in different EU member states with, in principle, with facility, with ease. So I would say that's a positive side of the MiCA as crypto asset service providers regulation.
Great. So thanks very much. And unfortunately, we're at the top of the hour, so we're out of time. I think Quinton asked some really interesting questions, but I think Dylan Kirk's question for getting the panel talking the most is the best one. So you get the Bitcoin. You're welcome to collect it from our offices, intentionally making it difficult for you. But yeah, I really wanted to thank the panelists. Thank you very much to each of you for your contribution and for joining today, especially Jennifer. It's really early in the morning, so thank you very much for the effort, and I hope the rest of your day goes well. Thank you to all of you for attending. We really appreciate it. And one last poll that I'd like to run, which we always run, is our feedback poll, just to get a feeling for you whether you thought today's session was useful. We always want to get feedback, and so please let us know. You're welcome also to email us to make suggestions on what topics you would like to hear more on. And also, if we didn't get to one of your questions today, you're welcome to email me, and I'll try and find the answer through the panelists and get the response back to you. So thanks very much. That's nice feedback from you. Really appreciate it. And yeah, one last thank you to everyone on the panel. Really do appreciate the contribution, and we look forward to engaging with you in a session again soon.
Thank you.
John.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.
Bye.
Thank you.